Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am one of their hosts that you hear every Friday, Ethan. I hope everyone's having a wonderful day. I feel like I'm having a great one as of right now. I just came from the dentist, so my teeth feel clean and well kept. Make sure, if you can go to the dentist, make sure you can go, because it's a wonderful experience. Maybe not while it's getting clean, sometimes it hurts, but no pain, no gain, right? I suppose. Speaking of no pain, no gain, if you've been a fan of the Carolina Panthers or Cam Newton or anything like that, you have been in some emotional distress, some emotional pain of recent time because he was unsigned. Going into the beginning of this week until recently, Cam Newton is now on I almost said the Carolina Panthers. That's how much I keep remembering of how everybody remembers of Cam Newton, unless you're like a college football fan, or should I say a supporter of just college football. Then you only know Cam from the 1 year at Auburn. But Cam in the NFL, of course, he's been in Carolina for all his life until recently. Now he is part of the New England Patriots. He signed a contract that could potentially net him $7 million in a year, but it's all tied up in incentives and stipulations and having to get certain milestone marks and things like that. So we don't know just how much money he's going to get, but it's a low risk, high reward for the Patriots and Bill Belichick, and it's something that really, really seems to be a chance for Cam Newton basically to have a year audition for the rest of the league, because I'm certain he doesn't want to make this money for the rest of his life, like this sort of threshold, because he's 31, I believe. He's very young still, which is insane, actually, looking back at it. And, you know, he's a guy that still has something left to prove. Like, I don't think that he's done. And I think a lot of people gave up on him, or people in Carolina gave up on him, and the rest of the league was just in a weird spot for quarterbacks to where, you know, Phillip Rivers gets picked up somewhere. Of course, we all know where Tom Brady went. And a lot of quarterbacks got drafted. So there wasn't open vacancies for the quarterback position as much as it may have seemed even a year ago. So now Cam is on the Patriots, and maybe we should have rethought about this. We kept thinking, oh yeah, Jarrett Stidham this, Jarrett Stidham that, and we didn't know for sure just how that was going to work out, and it didn't seem like the Patriots were going to budge on the idea that they were going to rock the boat with Jarrett Stidham and see how that was going to actually play out. So for the longest time, I think everybody just assumed that Jarrett Stidham was going to be the starter and they were going to figure something else out. Well, here we are. They figured something else out, and they brought in Cam Newton. So we don't know if Cam is going to automatically earn the starting position. But I would have to believe that if Bill Belichick is a guy who does not believe in the idea of quote-unquote tanking, because the NFL, people don't tank in the NFL for one. The NFL is too tough of a sport. And I mean tough as in it's 16-game seasons, right? And people don't want to risk their livelihood, don't risk their bodies in order to just lose to get better draft picks for owners, right? There's no guaranteed contracts. There's or there's no fully guaranteed contract. So you got to go out there and make your money. And players, I just have a hard time believing that in a super competitive sport like football, people are just okay with tanking. I wouldn't even say people are okay with tanking in basketball, because usually if there's tanking involved and you're bringing in new talent, 9 times out of 10, the people you're tanking with, you're not going to stick with. So I don't think anybody's actually okay with tanking when they're playing the sport. It's just something that GM offices and, front offices do, the math nerds, all that, say that it gives you a better probability to be better in a few years rather than rocking with what you have and trying to win. But in football, it's better to try to win anyway, because if you suck, you suck at the end of the day. If you're not good, you're not going to win a lot of games. And we saw it firsthand. The Miami Dolphins were not good in the beginning of the season. They were really abysmal, and people thought they would be the worst team of all time, and statistically rather. And it ended up, they found a way to turn it around. They ended up going 500 for the back half of the rest of their season, and now people are singing a different tune about the Dolphins. And I'm not going to sit here and say the Dolphins are projected to go like 9-7 now or 7-9, but it just goes to show you that not every team is tank central. Not everything is about tanking. We got to stop overblowing this ideology that tanking is what just smart people do, or that's what the smart person would do in a GM office. And football especially is just not something that happens. Anyway, taking this off of the tanking little mini rant about Cam Newton and Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick isn't a tanker. He never has been. And he's always tried his best to maximize the talent he has around him. And I think he saw that this team may still have a chance to do some things in the AFC that really is pretty top heavy from my perspective, and also is the division. You can still do some things in this AFC East because nothing is really guaranteed. We know the Bills are pretty decent now. We know the Bills have a number 1 wide receiver. They have a really great defense, and they have a young quarterback who hopefully is able to take another step in the right direction. Their offense is still probably predicated on running the football and controlling the clock and limiting turnovers and not really taking a lot of deep ball chances, but we'll see what happens if the season starts. We do have to keep in mind that they have been in the playoffs a few times in the last couple of years, but they haven't really done anything while they were there. The Patriots have all this experience and merit, and it's hard to get rid of the old guard until the old guard is gone. And the old guard technically is not gone. They may have lost in the playoffs and they lost Tom Brady, but they still have one of the best head coaches we've ever seen in the sport coaching their team, and it looks like he's in a different attack mode. It looks like he's thinking about different things, and honestly, I feel like Bill Belichick's pretty excited the fact that he doesn't have Tom Brady anymore. Maybe this unlocks a different level of his offense that he never had, because he had to rock with Tom Brady, and now he has the opportunity to do some things with Cameron Newton if he does win the starting job. So for fantasy purposes, we got to go through what he has done over his career in fantasy football. And also we got to look at what some people around his era and time have been able to do and what he does that makes everything worthwhile. So Cam Newton is a guy who is not the most accurate passer in the world. He's kind of he's more of arm strength than physical raw ability, but his accuracy has never always been a strong suit. With that being said, he is always been seen as a stat sheet stuffer in his early time, and nowadays he's kind of teetering off with age, but like most quarterbacks, things start to slow down the longer you're in the league. But he never really saw the same production as he did his Super Bowl run, and that's to be expected, right? There's a lot of fluky stuff in that Super Bowl run that happened as far as his stats and the things that transpired that season alone, but you have to include it into his overall body of work. He did have a really, really spectacular, almost 400 point run in 2015. And now we see quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes. We see Lamar Jackson. We see quarterbacks still kind of touching that realm, that space. I don't know if Cam will ever get back to that level because that was a different breed of stuff. He was untouchable for majority of the year until literally the Super Bowl. And since then, he's been close to 300 basically for the last couple years. And of course, last year he did not play enough games. He only played 2, so we don't even count 2019 against him. But when we look at his stats from 2011 to basically 2018, comparative to guys like Russell Wilson and Phillip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers, I look at these guys because they have been basically stat sheet stuffers within the fantasy football ranks. The quarterbacks are guys who I used to target as far as guys you want on your fantasy football team because they definitely bring out the best in your team. So Cam Newton's passing stats are a little bit left to be desired in some regard. Now, granted, some of these stats are a little bit weird because, of course, players have been playing longer and they have different offenses and different things going on. But I took it to 2012 onward, primarily because I put Russell Wilson in the player pool, and he did not come into the league until 2012. So from 2012 onward and to now, Cam has less passing yards than these guys, and a lower completion percentage. He's around 60, while these guys are around 65%. But he has an overall passer rating of 86, and he has a 91 interception, which is the second highest on this list. Of course, over 7 seasons, Aaron Rodgers has had only 46 interceptions, which is crazy. But he's an outlier and always has been as far as turnover ratios and things like that. But here we get crazy because if we look at the rushing numbers, the only person that is even equally comparable at this point is Russell Wilson. And if you look at the touchdowns, then it's absolutely insanity. So 44 touchdowns over the last 7 years. He averages 5 yards an attempt during a run. And the thing that's interesting about Cameron Newton, when I heard this on a podcast recently from Ryan Frasillo, and he had a guest on there, and he mentioned that the great thing about Cam Newton and his skill set is that he is all design runs. Everything he gets from the run game is basically design runs. He doesn't move outside and scramble outside the pocket. Now, either that's by design or by choice. It's just not something he's ever done. So that's why in the Super Bowl, Cam Newton ended up getting really, really flushed out and getting sacked on for majority of that game because they figured out that he doesn't scramble. They don't have to set out a spy. They don't have to kind of slow up on the blitz or blitz in a certain way because he is not going to escape and run out the pocket. So now it wouldn't surprise me if Bill Belichick finds a way to use this to his best ability because that's what he does. Cam Newton is a runner and a passer, and he's probably one of the most unique players we've ever seen in the sport, as just his physicality, his size, the way that he can be the best runner on your team, and he distributes the football around. And I think playing alongside someone like James White, especially coming from the Christian McCaffrey side of things, that's upside value potentially. I don't know what happens to Sony Michel in this. Not to say that I don't expect Sony Michel to do what he's already been doing, which is not that much. But in the passing game, I just don't see Sony Michel doing anything with Cam Newton or Jarrett Stidham. I don't think that changes his role in this offense or his role in his team. looking forward to the rest of their skill positions. Of course, they drafted their rookie tight end. I'm not sure, honestly. Their passing game can go one of two ways. It can be surprisingly better than what we thought. Edelman somehow still is a 1,000-yard receiver, and he gets multiple touchdowns, and all things are good on that side of the goal line for all things considered. But I would have to caveat this by saying they still don't have a lot of skill position players who you can trust. I don't know if there's a move to make there. I don't know if there's somebody that they're looking at that via trade or somebody left in free agency that no one's really had their radar on. But they have what they have now, and they just added Cam Newton. So I think that for Cam, this is a prove-it year, of course. And some would say that this could be his last chance. And I don't know why it should be his last chance. I think people unfairly grade Cam a bit harsher than he needs to be ever since that Super Bowl, because not everybody can win it. There's only one team that can win. And the best team definitely won that Super Bowl because they were incredible on defense, as in the Broncos. But we're going to take a break, and coming back, we're going to be talking about running backs. Once again, you already know, it's the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, we're back, GSMC Fantasy Footballers, the football kings of the universe. We are here once again talking about fantasy football running backs this time. And as you know, my favorite position in the NFL sometimes has people who are undervalued and overvalued. And our friends from Pro Football Focus, have created a list that we're going to go through, and, I'm going to give my opinions on some of these guys, and I'm going to, of course, go through all of these and make a conscious decision for myself. But I hope this information can help you guys do some things in your draft and your draft boards and make some conscious decisions, because that's all fantasy football is about. If you're not making conscious decisions, then you're just playing pick a guy with a cool name. And we don't want to do that here at the GSMC. So we're going to start with the undervalued fantasy football running backs in 2020. The first person on their list is Le'Veon Bell. So Bell is being drafted outside of the first 3 rounds in a 12-man league, even though he will continue to see plenty of volume in New York. In 2019, Le'Veon saw one of the NFL's biggest workloads, accumulating over 300 touches in 15 games, and he was one of 8 running backs to reach that feat, but the volume didn't translate into fantasy success. Bell finished the running back 16, running behind the Jets' 30th ranked run-blocking offensive line unit. He's only scored 4 touchdowns in just 2 rushing attempts, and that went for more than 15 yards, which ranked dead last among running backs with at least 100 carries. So the overall production was disappointing, but we have to remember that volume is king in fantasy football, and with running back rookie LaMichael Pirine and veteran Frank Gore to only competition for touches, Bell is going to see plenty of work in 2020. He still operates as the primary pass-catching running back and could finish with a lot of the team's target share, considering the lack of established receivers on the Jets roster. His Pro Football Focus receiving grade in 2019 was a 77.3, which ranked 5th out of 19 running backs with at least 50 targets. The Jets offense is also due for a positive regression, and it was bad across the board last season, ranking dead last in average yards per play, which was 4.6. In 2017 and 2018, the Arizona Cardinals and Buffalo Bills both ranked bottom 5 in average yards per play. But in 2019, both teams' average yards per play increased to an average of 5.25, which was near the league's average of 5.39. Quarterback Sam Darnold will be healthy and returning without mono, so New York has made a significant overhaul as well at the offensive line position, starting with his first-round pick, Mikey Beckton. And if the Jets' offense can be even average in 2020, Bell has a strong chance of finishing in the top 12 option with his work as a receiver out the backfield, and an opportunity to be able to see more touchdowns. So Bell's ADP is running back 20, which basically means that you're drafting him at his floor. And Pro Football Focus's fantasy projections have Bell 10th in total rushing attempts and 9th in total receptions among running backs. I feel like that's a solid case for Le'Veon Bell, who everybody's been kind of questionable about in the first place, right? We have no idea just how good the Jets offense is going to be this year, but from what we saw last year, it was 100% abysmal. They haven't done some improvements in the offseason like most teams do, and most teams aren't supposed to do. That's their job, is to improve season after season in order to get to the promised land. And based off of volume, based off of how many touches he gets, based off of the eye test, I don't think that Le'Veon Bell lost a step on the Jets. It's not like he's regressing as a player. It's just that a lot of the stuff that was around him, a lot of the players, a lot of the personnel, was just not up to par. His best option outside of himself was Robbie Anderson last year, and Robbie Anderson didn't have the greatest year for fantasy wide receivers out there. I know firsthand because I had Robbie Anderson. So it was a tough scene for a lot of different players. Of course, they lost Sam Darnold for numerous amounts of games. When Sam Darnold came back, things were better overall for their team, but I wouldn't say that it was still better for Le'Veon Bell. So hopefully they can get Le'Veon more involved numbers-wise in the offense, aside from just, raw touches, and maybe we'll be able to see some things really, really come to fruition with that signing that he was brought on last year. All right, next is David Montgomery. So he's the consensus running back 23, and his average draft position is 27 at running back. So Montgomery fell victim to similar situation as Le'Veon Bell. He got a workload with 242 carries and 25 receptions, but failed to meet the expectations of an early round pick. The running back rookie last year still finished the season with 24 overall in the running back section, but ranked 8th in forced missed tackles. He had 47 of those, and among running backs with at least 25 carries, he struggled to create on his own, as his yards after contact per attempt were 2.3, and that ranked outside the top 70 qualified running backs, and he also failed to make big plays with just 5 runs with over 15 yards. The good news for Montgomery is that the breakaway percentage is not a stable metric, and there is still an opportunity for Montgomery to create more big plays in 2020, considering how he showed that he can be elusive. He missed tackles forced per attempt at a rank of 13th among running backs with at least 100 carries, and that's much more stable metric for future success. Nick Foles, potentially under center, could also increase Montgomery's role as a receiver. Foles is not a mobile quarterback by any means and will not have the option to tuck and run the ball like, a Mitchell Trubisky. And the veteran also has a history of targeting the running back position. The Eagles heavily featured Darren Sproles as a receiver in his second stint with Philadelphia in the 3 games that he started for Jacksonville after his injury. Running back Leonard Fournette saw a massive 20% target share. So with improved quarterback play, the Bears should be a better offense in general, which means more red zone work for Montgomery. And this is where we'll have to provide, of course, fantasy points, since he's not a primary pass catching back. And last year, Chicago's total of 39 goal line plays, including inside the 5, was just 21st in the league, and they gave Montgomery his share of tries, 18 carries, but they only amounted to 5 touchdowns. Last season, running backs with at least 17 carries inside the 5 averaged about 8.5. Montgomery is going to see another heavy workload considering Ryan Nall is his primary backup on early downs, and he looks to be a great value going into the end of the 4th and beginning of the 5th round with potential increase in receiving work and touchdowns. The fantasy projections have Montgomery seeing just over 240 touches in 2020. I am going to say that I was not on his radar last year, to be honest, and I was a bit nervous to see where the Bears were going to work because I feel like Mitchell Trubisky held that team back from what it could be, and that's not a unpopular statement. I think most people think that way in the first place anyway, but I am curious to look at him, so I'll have to dig more deep into that position, into that situation, because I feel like the Bears are going to be a team that a lot of people probably are hesitant on looking at their overall playmakers, and because we don't know what the quarterback situation is. We know Nick Foles is coming, but we have to assume that Nick Foles' floor is better than Mitchell Trubisky's floor right now, and a lot of people are projecting that both of them will somehow see the field, and that's never a good sign. So I am going to put a tab on him, so to speak. Next is Ronald Jones, where he is ranked 30th in running backs and his ADP is 36. So fantasy owners apparently still smell the stench of Ronald Jones' poor rookie season, despite all the strides he made in year 2. In his sophomore back season, he acquired more than 1,000 yards from scrimmage and scored 6 touchdowns. He showed great improvement as a wide receiver and a rusher, ranking 5th in yards per route ran among running backs with at least 25 carries. He was also tough to bring down, ranking 16th in elusive rating and 8th in missed tackles forced per attempt. So Jones looked to be the number 1 running back for Tampa Bay, but they drafted Vanderbilt's Keyshawn Vaughn in the 3rd round of 2020 draft and has made things less clear still. The suppression of hype could only add value, especially since Vaughn is more likely to work on passing downs. There's also a chance that Vaughn works as a receiver, but with so many weapons Tom Brady's disposal, any receiving production may not be reliable on a weekly basis. The Bucs also have another pass-catching back on the roster in Dare Ungumbwale. So with the offense expected to hum, we all want to see early down runners and goal line backs on the team, and Jones looks to be the clear front runner. So keep in mind that Jones has also flashed impressive explosiveness in 2019, and he was 14th best in breakaway percentage, and he was 4th highest in yards after the catch per reception. He might not need to see much work on the passing game to be a good value in the 6th and 7th rounds, and with flashes of big play upside combined with his potential role near the goal line in a prolific offense by design. So now we're going to look at some overvalued guys, and just brace yourselves because there's probably some guys that everybody's probably looked at and said, he might be a good try. So Joe Mixon had a slow start to 2019, and he was just running back 36 at the end of week 9, but things completely changed over the second half of the year as he finished as running back 7 from week 10 on to week 16. And part of his improvement can be credited to seeing 20 more carries than any other back during that time. But Joe Mixon's grades and rate stats are greatly improved, and he finally started seeing the end zone. There is certainly reason to be excited about Joe Mixon and the Bengals offense heading into 2020. Wide receiver A.J. Green and 2019 first-round left tackle Joe Williams returned from injury, while rookies Joe Burrow and T. Higgins offer a reason for optimism. There doesn't seem to appear to any new competition for Mixon snaps, which also gives him a high floor. The problem is that in order for Mixon to match his ADP, he needs to put up last year's week 10 to week 16 production over an entire season, which is unlikely. While his consensus rankings aren't much lower than his ADP, our projections at Fantasy Football Focus, or Pro Football Focus, that is insane, put him at running back 16. So the first issue is that Mixon is unlikely to see as many opportunities as last year. He averages 21.6 carries per game, which isn't very sustainable over a long term. and an improved Bengals offense may get him more garbage time carries, but he won't see as many touches early in games. And the Bengals ran on 44% of first quarter plays last year and the sixth highest rate. And with Burrow and an exciting trio of wide receivers, they will likely be passing the ball more. Okay, so next we're going to get into Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams. So while Clyde the Glide is near unanimous first overall pick in rookie dynasty drafts, his outlook for 2020 is a little less clear. Regardless of how talented he and the 2019 lead rusher Damian Williams are, it's hard to imagine so much fantasy production from two players on a team with Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce. Last year, Williams was 22nd on most PPR points per game, while backup LaShawn McCoy was 43rd. In general, the top rookie running backs are being drafted higher than their projected points. While you're picking for upside, whether or not you're picking a running back in redraft, at these players' ADPs, there will be far more disappointments than hits. Edwards-Helaire needs to dominate playing time and to match his ADP, and the projections currently give Edwards more than twice as much carries as Williams and more than 3 times the targets. Even with that volume, the projections put him at running back 22. One reason for optimism, though, is that Edwards is how well Kareem Hunt performed in his rookie season in 2017, and the difference that Hunt didn't have much competition. The 3 running backs behind him on the depth chart combined for 2 carries in 2018 and nothing in 2019. The Chiefs obviously won't be a run-heavy as they were in 2017 with Alex Smith and Hunt unless Mahomes is significantly injured. So the Chiefs' first half pass percentage of 75.8% in the regular season in 2019 is most by the league and by a far margin. Last on this list is Marlon Mack, which I don't know why he's even overvalued. He's definitely somebody who took a hit in the draft this year. So like Damian Williams, Marlon Mack faces competition for playing time in the highly drafted rookie, but it gets worse for Mack alongside facing competition from Jonathan Taylor. The Colts also have undervalued pass catching back Naheem Hines. Mack's fantasy stock has gone down even before the NFL draft after averaging 18 pass routes per game over the first half of 2019. The drop to 9 per game in the second half. Hines, and to a lesser extent Jordan Wilkins, took these passing routes. Even Mack's production as a runner last year doesn't say much, as the Colts' stellar offensive line would have been given even an average running back a chance to succeed. The second-round rookie will be a major competition for early down snaps, and the projections expect 198 carries for Taylor compared to 95 for Mack. Those numbers would need to flip for Mack's favor in order for his current ADP, and it would take an injury for him to exceed it. The upside for Mack is that he did perform well as a runner last year, and it should give Taylor a good fight for playing time. Mack had a 27 first down percentage or touchdown rate in 2019, which was the best rate for backs with at least 200 carries. And Taylor, on the other hand, led all FBS running backs in first downs each of the last 2 seasons. Wilkins was the Colts' highest graded rusher in 2019 on a limited sample size, and this will be one of NFL's most crowded running backfields in the 2020 season. So there you have it. Some overrated, some undervalued, I should say, and some overvalued guys for running back. We'll continue on. We will continue with the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast in just a moment after this break. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, fantasy football heads, we are back with the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, and we are going to get into the 9 most must-avoid players this season in fantasy football. And I'm going to admit it, some of the guys on this list hurt my feelings. Some of these guys on this list have hurt my feelings in past years. Some I'm a little bit questionable about, but we're going to get into it. So, first on this list here is running back from Buffalo, second-year player Devin Singletary. So, while his running back 25 ranking feels about right, it's hard to envision a realistic scenario in which Singletary turns a profit. He has competition in Zach Moss and Josh Allen, and he should handle for most of the work underneath the goal line, and it's not unthinkable that Moss turns into a split backfield. The addition of Stephon Diggs shrinks the target pie in the passing game even more, and a pie hasn't been particularly favorable to running backs with Allen. So he's 15.9% target share in 2019, 17.4% in 2018. Last but not least, Buffalo does not have an overtly favorable schedule, and things get really challenging after Week 11 bye as they play the Chargers, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Denver, and New England. It's very likely that some of these guys will have 0 shares in Devin Singletary at all. Experts are 9 spots lower than ADP on him, and for good reason. He is third in line for goal line carries, as he was last year, and which led to him getting just 2 carries inside the 5-yard line. He also wasn't particularly efficient in the passing game, leaving a lot to be desired. In addition, with Zach Moss in the third round highlights the fact that they want to utilize the timeshare, and Moss is in the perfect thunder to Singletary's lightning. The Bills GM has already come forward and said Moss will take over the Frank Gore role, which means there isn't enough upside to select him closer to his average draft position. Next is Raheem Mostert. But first, let me just say this here. I like Devin Singletary a lot. He did me a service as a rookie last year. I didn't expect to see as much, and I was really hurt when Frank Gore took a lot of his touches. And it seems to me that the running back by committee strategy is going to be fully implemented within the Buffalo backfield. So I would have to say you have to be cautious in taking him. And if you have somebody who will get more run and more bang for your buck, it probably is safer to find him somewhere else. But into Raheem Mostert. So it's understandable that some people would have been enchanted by the big numbers that he rolled up in December and January. He had 715 yards and 12 touchdowns in his last 8 games, playoffs included. But the overall profile suggests he could be the Dexys Midnight Runners class of one-hit wonders. He's 28. He's only 205 pounds. He doesn't catch many passes. He's basically a non-factor on offense in 4 college seasons at Purdue and his first 4 NFL seasons. He's destined to share workload with Telvin Coleman and perhaps others. You're going to draft him at or above his average rank, and that's just not going to be great. It seems as though everybody is hyped for him, and just like before, he was super hot from week 12 to the playoffs. It just doesn't seem sustainable, and honestly, he's 28 years old at a running back, and it looked like he had a rookie season. Of course, it's a brilliant story, great story for him, but I just don't see it really transpiring into anything more than just one of those weird seasons that we're going to look back on and say, y'all remember when Raheem Mostert almost destroyed many fantasy leagues? Same thing. Next is A.J. Brown. So we all want to like A.J. Brown, but it's hard to get behind him near wide receiver 16. Everything about his debut screams fantasy regression, tying just for 46 among wideouts and targets, racking up 20.2 yards per catch, and scoring on 15% of his catches. His quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, is also bound for regression from his 7.7 touchdown rate and league-leading 9.6 yards per attempt. Brown saw 10% of the Titans' targets inside the 10-yard line, tying for 119th in the league in the category, and is likely to see some role growth in the year or two. Sure, but everything broke right to push Brown into wide receiver 15, half PPR finish last year, and you don't get that kind of luck 2 years in a row in NFL. Plus, Tennessee's run-heavy offense doesn't sport the target upside to make him an impending regression, and I would say he's a guy that I would look at somewhere else in that same range, and I would focus on other players. Just because I've always been kind of hesitant on Tennessee's offense in general outside of Derrick Henry. I'm not too sure what their passing game is going to look like. And I think this is just another strong case of the eye test where I didn't look into the numbers too hard for A.J. Brown or the Titans. But it always felt like this can't be something that, from his numbers and what I saw, not to say that he's a bad player, I just didn't see the numbers being a reflection of what he actually is right now. Okay, we're going to get into Odell Beckham Jr. now. And it is terrifying to be avoiding Beckham giving his upside, but that's what we have to do with his current draft costs. He has been already missed 21 games in his 6-year career, and he's really should have missed several last year dealing with an already core injury. And Kevin Stefanski is going to institute a run-heavy attack as he did in Minnesota with a 48 run rate, fourth most in the league, that was. And Beckham won't see the same 24.9 target share as he did last year with the addition of Austin Hooper and with Kareem Hunt involved for a full season. Considering the injury history, the reduced targets, and the fact that he hasn't topped 7 touchdowns since 2016, people are fading at his current price. And that makes a lot of sense. I would be in the same boat. In fact, I am in the same boat. I honestly have no problem with passing on Odell Beckham for multiple drafts because I just don't know Cleveland. I don't know what their attempts are going to be, and I just don't see it. Next is a surprising one is Devontae Parker. On the surface, it appears Parker finally broke it in his 5th NFL year, but the consensus of the circumstances that conspired to result in his first 1,000-yard season won't be replicated in 2020. The Dolphins had the worst rushing game in the league, second worst defense, and no other capable wide receivers from week 1 through 9. When Preston Williams was on the field, Parker averaged 3.5 receptions for 50 yards per game in 8 games. From week 10 on, he racked up 100 yards per game with Williams shelved and the Finns constantly playing from behind. The return of Williams, the additions of Jordan Howard and Matt Breida at running back, and insertion of rookie quarterback will revert Parker to a boom or bust flex play each week. Next on the list is Melvin Gordon. So we will not be having any Gordon on our team for fantasy for the GSMC. And here's why. So at the price that he's going for now, I can't imagine it. There are a few reasons for this. One, he is on a new team and he has to learn new offense and offensive line and online meetings. 2, he has only had 1 season where he has rushed for more than 4 yards per carry. His volume, touchdowns, and receiving work have really carried his value thus far in his career. And 3, we all like Denver offense and there are new pretty toys, but do we really think that it's going to get Gordon the amount of work he got in prime Chargers offensive days? Don't forget that they still have Phillip Lindsay, who we don't think is going to let Gordon take 70% of backfield touches. So he's going to be sharing touches. Phillip Lindsay and him are pretty equal as far as skill level, in my opinion. They just do different things, and it's going to be a tough running back carry share there. Next is Evan Ingram, a very controversial guy in the tight end space. Evan Ingram is the easy answer for a lot of people. He had issues staying healthy over the past couple of seasons. Plus, this is a loaded receiving core. The targets will be split pretty evenly, and he's coming off a foot injury that had him in December. So Ingram's certainly talented, and we like him as a player, but everything has not gone his way, and it would have to go his way for him to return value on his current ADP. and people are staying far away. And last on this list is Todd Gurley. So could Gurley have a bounce back season and prove his former team wrong? Sure. Could he see little to no goal line touches and see his knees wear down throughout the season? That's pretty harsh. That's also possible. We find that the latter to be slightly more likely given that we already know about his knees, and people are not willing to spend a third-round pick on a player with documented knee issues. And that makes sense. That's like, draft 101. If you know some guy has an injury history, you don't want to get involved with him too much. I wouldn't want to all that much. So I did skip one guy, and that's Darius Geis, because I feel like this is kind of a no-brainer. After missing the entire rookie season with a torn ACL in 2018, Geis then suffered another injury in week 1 of the 2019 season, and he manages to come back. In week 11, played 4 games and suffered an MCL sprain and missed the final 3 matchups of the year. In 2 seasons, he has had 42 carries for 245 yards. Fantasy football players should not only question Geis' health, but also if he's worthy of being drafted as the number 27 running back, which is where he's going to be in half PPR drafts. According to the latest Fantasy Pros average draft position data, with Adrian Peterson still in the mix, a new offense in Washington, and a gadget rookie in Antonio Gibson, Geis' price point is just too costly considering the negative variables. And I think that's just a lot of words to say. The dude just hasn't played. He hasn't been on the field and he hasn't been healthy. And when you have health concerns in fantasy football, there's nothing worse. So you have to be able to look at the big picture. If he's on your draft board and you have him this high, you should probably reconsider. You need to start taking injuries more into account in your draft boards. And it's something that I have to do more too. Because last year I didn't really take into Odell's injury history that much because it seemed like he would be healthy. He didn't play that much to begin with. And when he got to Cleveland, I guess he just didn't come healthier. And that bit me from the behind. Injuries happen. Injuries are a part of the game. So you can't always predict when somebody is going to get hurt or if somebody is going to be healthier than they seem. But, the quote, when somebody shows you who they are, you should believe them. I'm not saying that someone like Darius Geis is showing me that his injury history makes him unreliable. But what he's shown me thus far, I have to believe what it is. He is not trustworthy to be at his draft position currently. And I would not draft him there. I honestly wouldn't draft a lot of players at their draft positions for injury reasons, like Todd Gurley, of course, Evan Ingram himself, and Darius Geis. And honestly, A.J. Brown, he's not injured, but just for where he's being placed in that Tennessee offense, I really do feel like Tennessee was just a flash in the pan for the most part, and now we're dealing with the overcorrection on how we feel about them as a whole unit. I like Mike Vrabel, I like their team, but I just don't see them being a team that is going to start balancing their attack on offense. That just never was their MO. It hasn't been their MO since, Derrick Henry has been there in the first place, and it would only make sense that they figure something else out as in a play action style offense rather than trying to get everybody else involved on the outside when you have someone like Derrick Henry who basically almost got you to the Super Bowl by himself. All right, so we're going to take our final break and then we're getting to our last segment here at the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, where we are going to end our show today with a little bit of fun. I wanted to talk about some of my most memorable fantasy moments as far as bad trades or just things that really highlight some of the fantasy action that I receive on a yearly basis. And some of it is football, some of it is not football, actually. It's just fantasy related. And I find the story just to be a little bit funny. So, first I wanted to talk about the fantasy story of recent that is not football. But in fact, it's virtual basketball, so it's NBA 2K. I was in a fantasy My League. If you understand what My League is, it is basically playing association mode if you're an older crowd and play video games. And if you never played video games in your life, it's basically where you join with a bunch of other people, control one team you control one out of the 32 teams in the NBA, and you basically manage them like a GM, and you play games, and you go up against other people. You make trades, you can go to the draft, and in a fantasy league setting, of course, you draft a team pool of players from across the league, and you make your own team from scratch, and you roll with that for the rest of your days. The interesting part of this fantasy league was they put in legends in the game. So, real interesting thing about 2K, they updated how you can customize your My Leagues, and you can make some really, really interesting historic classes. You can do class-specific drafts. You can do fantasy drafts where you have every version of an NBA legend, or you can just have one of the one best version of him, and you can draft him among everybody else on the current roster. So there was prime Shaq, there was prime Kobe Bryant, there was prime Hakeem Olajuwon, prime Michael Jordan. All of them, the best versions of themselves, were in the draft, and people were going bananas. So I believe my team, I had prime version Blake Griffin and Anthony Davis and Rondo. I just had a bunch of people who I enjoyed watching. My team wasn't that good, though. And, 2K has its own problems as far as what's good and what's not. But that's besides the point. What I'm talking about is really the trades and how people marketed themselves to make their teams better for the long term, because this isn't just about you watch people play and they determine the stats. It's about you have to physically play the game and you have to compete against other people. And you want the best people possible. Well, maybe even 4 days after the draft, me and my friend Dario, we log on to the game. We're just looking at the My League. We're looking at the trades, the trend, like what you can do, because there are some CPUs controlling teams, so you'd have to bargain off a player off of them, and it's kind of difficult to bargain CPU teams to trade with you. So sometimes you use this tool called the Trade Finder, where you can put up a player that you own on a team and put them up for basically kind of like an auction block or some sort of trade finder. So they'll find a trade via all the rest of the teams that sound logical to the CPU, and you can choose out of one of them to make said trade. Or you just see what the value is for certain players. That's how I check value for my players all the time. And while I was doing that, we see this notification go across the screen saying that Michael Jordan was traded. And he was traded to the best player in the league at the time for pennies on the dollar. And I mean, it was for nothing. Because there's no stipulations. All you have to do is match salaries, and it has nothing to do with how good the player is in order for trade. I mean, that's how it is in real life, except for you understand when a player is better than one another. But in 2K, all you have to do is match salaries, and that's fine. So they matched the salaries, and somehow this guy ended up getting Michael Jordan for a no-name guy who it didn't matter. And the dude ends up quitting the league directly after trading Michael Jordan away. So we sound the alarm in the group chat, because it's kind of like a Woj bomb, essentially. I'm like, yo, what just happened? We just saw Michael Jordan just get transferred over for pennies on the dollar. The dude left the group chat. The dude left the My League. Something fishy just went down, And we got to sound the alarm. So I'm spamming the group chat. Dario spamming the group chat. We're trying to get answers because we don't know what's happening. The homeboy who ended up making the trade for Michael Jordan, he's just like, hey, man, it's all about the player, not the, as in like the person with the sticks, and not about the cards you have, like, dude had Michael Jordan and he wasn't winning. And I'm just like, apparently the dude was his cousin. So all I can say is if he really wanted to win the league, it just sounded like he just said, hey, man, I'll pay you $5 because we didn't play for money. So he's like, I'll give you $5 right now for Michael Jordan. That's basically what happened. And he got him. So everybody's just like, oh, yeah, man, the integrity of the league is gone. We can't have this. There's no parity now. This dude had Michael Jordan, and he already had, like, prime Derrick Rose and Dwight. And it was just out of control. And the league just sort of basically vanished in thin air. It was done. Everybody left. Everybody who had a sense of pride left, and that was it. So it was a funny story. It was just the audacity of the trade that made everybody so upset. It was like, you can't do this. If that's the case, I'm selling all my good players to make a profit. Like, I'm not getting any money by playing in this, so I might as well get $20 for 2 virtual players that I did no work to earn. Yeah, sure, give me that. So I just found that pretty funny. There was a trade last year in fantasy football for Ezekiel Elliott. So Ezekiel Elliott got traded for Mark Ingram and I believe David Montgomery. David Montgomery didn't have the best season as people predicted him to have. And Mark Ingram was kind of coming out at a time where the Ravens were slowing down, and not as in like they weren't winning games and they weren't dominating, but I mean as in they weren't dominating. And Mark Ingram wasn't over here toting 23 fantasy points a game or something like that. And Zeke was feasting at the time. So this trade happens to the guy who essentially was in the top spot of the league. He gets Ezekiel Elliott. Everybody's in immediate uproar. And this is where being a GM, when you're being a commissioner of a fantasy league, you have to make a decision if you care about parity of leagues and competition more than this guy is a grown human being who traded with another grown human being, and they made a trade that they agreed upon, and thus whatever happens is beyond your control. You cannot veto the trade because the trade happened within the guidelines of what the league stands for. So, of course, there's a big uproar about it. The trade does not get reversed, and that's just the end-all, be-all of it. But I just find those sort of situations kind of telling because I haven't been a commissioner in about 3 years now, and I'm planning to be one soon if the league starts up. So it's just another reminder that you have to know what your core values are in your league. If you care more about league parity, then you probably veto this trade. If you care more about people's right to choose whether or not what to do with their team, no matter the consequences and how it affects the rest of the league, then you go with that route and you probably don't veto the trade. And most people don't. I don't know. I'm not a fan of having a veto by committee system, so like the rest of the league veto stuff, because that can kind of get, as much as people hate the idea of collusion, you can say that vetoing a trade because you just don't like the guy or you're in competition, right? And you don't want somebody to get a spot over you in the playoffs because they made a decent trade that you couldn't acquire. That wouldn't be cool. That wouldn't be kosher. So you don't want that either. So it's either you veto or there's no veto at all. And that can be a little bit taxing on the commissioner in everyday settings. Another trade that I found pretty interesting last year was the Antonio Brown fiasco. My friend David, he tried to get Antonio Brown, and he successfully got him via trade. And at this moment in time, I believe Antonio Brown did not play a game for the Raiders. So people are scrambling, trying to figure out what's going to happen. We don't know if Antonio Brown's going to play in the season. So He's not on the Raiders at this point. David makes a trade for Antonio Brown. I don't even remember what he traded him for. I think it was not much. And it was a risk for David. So the commissioner was like, okay, whatever. You have no idea what's going to happen. And, if you find immediate value within AB, then congratulations, you've broke the code. But if you, get sold out and he doesn't end up doing well or he doesn't find a team, then that's on you. Of course, the rest. AB signs with the Patriots or gets traded to the Patriots, and the Patriots play him in one game and then he's done. So he got absolutely really one game out of value from AB, and I'm not even sure if he won that week when he had AB, but that ended up being what happened. And it was really funny because he still talks about it right now to this day, that was the mark of his fantasy season right there. I told him, if you get AB, it's going to be like getting bad luck, because every team that he's came from is saying that, yeah, it's probably better for the rest of us that we don't have him here, and they're letting him walk. So you think because of fantasy reasons, this just means that I'm getting immense value cheaper on the dollar because nobody wants to deal with the head case. And what ends up happening is AB has a head case moment, literally not even 2 weeks in New England, and you lose out. You lose out on the trade by default because essentially you traded for nothing. You traded for 1 week of value that I don't even remember if you won or not. So this goes to show you, sometimes trying to trade for the hot commodity, it's kind of like when Le'Veon did not play for the entire season. We had no idea if he was not going to play or not. And there was a time where people were like, you got to sell Le'Veon. And my friend Dario was like, yeah, no, I'm not selling him. He's going to come back and play. I'll get more value later on when he decides to come back for the season. Le'Veon never came back. So he would have gotten really good value literally the day after the draft. But since he held on to it, no one ever traded Le'Veon with him. And that was it. And he never received the same deals, even if people were interested in saying, oh, maybe Le'Veon does come back. He never received the same deals again. And that was something that always hung over his head for that whole season. And that's why you should always believe what people show you, because you never know how they will change, if they ever change their mind. But like the old proverb is always said to be, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Don't just start making stuff up thinking that they aren't who they say they are, or what they show you who they are to be, because it's a falsehood. Now, I'm not trying to get all philosophical. This is fantasy football, but same details apply. Same messages apply to a different scale here at the GSMC. So with that said, this is the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening this week. And don't forget to stay locked and tuned in to all GSMC content and shows here on the network. I'd encourage you all to please leave a like and review. It helps us so much. On whatever platform you choose to listen to us, it would be very gracious, and we'd all be very appreciative if you can do that for us. Now, finally, don't forget social media. We're on it: Facebook, Twitter, GSMC Fantasy Football. You can find us on those two platforms. You can ask us questions. You can debate fantasy topics with us. You can even prompt questions that you would like us to answer on the show via social media. So it'd be a great way to interact with us. We can interact with you, and it's another way of building a sense of community amongst one another. And what's better than community, especially in a time like today where we feel less and less like a community every day. So once again, thank you for listening. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be back next week talking about all different types of great stuff. But for the GSMC, this is Ethan signing out, and I'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.